Welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works. We take the fascinating stuff you send us and really kind of dig in, extract the good stuff, all those key insights.
Yeah, it's like a shortcut to becoming seriously well-informed on a topic you care about.
Right. Today we're tackling this book, Creativity, Inc. by Ed Catmull.
Ah, great choice. It's a classic for a reason.
You sent over some excerpts, and we're going to explore the principles of creativity, innovation, and management. You know, how to build and keep that creative spirit alive.
Not just the successes, but also those fumbles, the stumbles, the things that didn't quite go to plan.
That's what's so valuable about Catmull's story. He doesn't shy away from the tough stuff.
Right. Makes it way more relatable, right?
Absolutely. So Creativity, Inc. starts with something I think a lot of people will relate to, this feeling of being a bit adrift, even after a huge success.
Yeah, Catmull talks about feeling this way after Toy Story was a hit. And, I think a lot of us can relate to that. You work so hard towards a goal, and then when you reach it, it's like, now what?
Exactly. That's it. It's almost counterintuitive. You hit this massive milestone, but then you get this weird emptiness. Why do you think that happens?
I think when you're so focused on that one big goal, everything else kind of fades into the background. Then suddenly the goal is gone and you have to reorient yourself. It's like, I don't know, like taking down the scaffolding after you've built a building.
That is such a good analogy. The structure's there, but you need a new framework to move forward.
Right. And Catmull being so open about that feeling, even as, the head honcho at Pixar, I think that really speaks to how universal that experience is.
It's a reminder that success isn't a finish line. It's more like a pit stop. You got to refuel and figure out the next leg of the journey.
Totally. Okay, so way before Toy Story, in Pixar's early days, they had this very clear goal.
Make something they wanted to see.
Exactly. Trusting that if they loved it, others would too.
Even pushing back on Disney's ideas to make Toy Story a musical, what's the big takeaway for us in that early vision?
Well, I think it's about the power of having an authentic vision. It's not just chasing trends or trying to outsmart the market. It's about creating something that comes from a place of genuine passion.
Yeah.
And that passion can be contagious.
It shines through.
And that stance on the musical thing shows how important it is to protect that vision, even when there's pressure to do something different.
You got to stick to your guns sometimes.
For sure.
So beyond just the movies themselves, Catmull talks about this shift in his own focus, moving from just solving technical problems to building a lasting creative culture.
Yeah, that's crucial. I mean, technical skill is great. A brilliant idea is fantastic.
Yeah.
But for long-term success, you need an environment where those things can flourish again and again.
So it's about building the garden where those ideas can grow.
Exactly. It's the soil, the sunlight, the whole ecosystem. And that means thinking about the people, how they communicate, how they collaborate, the shared purpose that binds them.
He has this great story about the meeting table, right? How they switched from a long, skinny table to a square one.
Yeah. And Catmull stresses how that square table changed the whole dynamic.
It seems like such a small thing, but it made a huge difference.
Totally. The square table fostered more open communication, less hierarchy. It didn't matter where you sat. Everyone had an equal voice.
So even seemingly insignificant things like the shape of a table can influence how people interact.
Yeah, it's a reminder to think about your own spaces. How are they encouraging or hindering open communication?
Food for thought. Okay, he then introduces this fantastic analogy. It's about, management decisions and the problems that stem from them.
Ah, the saplings in the oak tree.
That's the one.
So he says, the little problems that pop up, they're like saplings sprouting from a bigger problem, the oak tree.
So instead of just chopping away at the saplings, we need to find that root cause, that oak tree.
Exactly. Address the root, not just the symptoms. That's how you make a real, lasting impact.
Love that. Now, going back to some of Catmull's influences, he talks about Walt Disney's approach on his TV show, The Wonderful World of Disney.
Right, and he specifically mentions how Disney kind of demystified the magic.
Showing how the special effects were done, how the animation worked.
Yeah, and the point is that actually made the magic even more special.
Instead of taking away the wonder, it made people appreciate the craft even more.
Exactly. Like, wow, look at the skill that went into creating that.
Do you think that influenced Catmull's own thinking?
I think so. Catmull clearly values transparency and understanding the process. It's not just about the end product, it's about the journey, the talent, the hard work.
So then Catmull takes us back to the mid-20th century, this era of incredible optimism and technological advances.
Right, like organ transplants, a polio vaccine, the beginnings of AI.
And looming over it all, Sputnik, this sense of national anxiety, but also this drive to innovate. How did this era shape the landscape for creativity, do you think?
I think it's a great example of how, even a sense of pressure, of urgency, can be a powerful motivator. The optimism of the time meant people believed in the potential for progress, but Sputnik added this, like, we need to get smarter faster.
It upped the stakes.
For sure. And that combination of possibility and challenge often leads to huge breakthroughs.
Case in point, ARPA, created directly in response to Sputnik, this mission to prevent technological surprise.
And look at what came out of ARPA. The computer revolution, the internet. Talk about a ripple effect.
It's incredible. It shows how government investment in research can have these massive unexpected benefits.
It's not always a direct line, but ARPA's story shows how focusing on getting smarter in one area can have this huge impact on seemingly unrelated fields.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so Catmull also talks about this tension he felt early on between the power of the individual and the strength of a group.
Yeah, that's something anyone who's ever collaborated can relate to.
Yeah.
How do you balance individual talent with the power of a team?
Finding that sweet spot where everyone shines, but the group also works together seamlessly.
And that's the real challenge, right?
Yeah.
Because individual vision is crucial, but a well-functioning team can achieve so much more than any one person.
He then describes this incredible collaborative environment at the University of Utah.
Yeah, where he did his groundbreaking work on curved surfaces and the Z-buffer.
It sounds like they were really piggybacking on each other's ideas.
Totally. It was this fertile ground for innovation where sharing knowledge wasn't just encouraged, it was like built into the culture.
But then he contrasts that with his time at NYIT, which, despite having funding, they lacked a key ingredient: strong storytelling.
Resources and talent are important, but if you're missing a critical piece, you're going to be limited in what you can achieve.
He even mentions a near partnership with Disney that fell through, and then, of course, the Star Wars phenomenon.
And those events really highlight how filmmaking was changing, how technology and story were starting to merge in a really powerful way.
Okay, next. Catmull briefly touches on this rapid evolution of computing, from those giant mainframes to personal computers.
It was a crazy time, constant innovation and intense competition, the need to adapt just to stay in the game.
And that's a lesson that's still so relevant today, right?
Oh, absolutely. In any field, if you're not adapting, you're falling behind.
Then comes Lucasfilm.
Which Catmull famously describes as managing a herd of horses.
A very apt description, I imagine. He also talks about working with George Lucas, his, down-to-earth wisdom and that incredible long-term vision.
Yeah, Lucas's approach to things like Star Wars licensing was way ahead of its time.
It shows the importance of thinking beyond just the immediate project and considering the long-term impact.
Strategic thinking is crucial, especially in a field like entertainment.
Then we're introduced to John Lasseter, his first visit to Lucasfilm, his reaction to The Road to Point Reyes. It sounds like a really pivotal moment.
Oh yeah, it's like you can sense that those two were destined to collaborate. They shared this passion for animation, for pushing boundaries, for telling great stories.
Two peas in a pod. But then Catmull also talks about this really challenging time at Lucasfilm with the dweebs, the computer graphics division, almost being shut down.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of, creating groundbreaking stuff, there's always a risk of things falling apart.
And he makes a really important point. Their most valuable asset was their team, their talent.
Always protect your talent.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of any creative endeavor.
Okay, so then we get to the founding of Pixar and those early struggles. They were surprisingly naive about running a hardware company, selling the Pixar image computer.
Even with Steve Jobs on board.
Even with Steve Jobs.
It just goes to show, even brilliant people can make mistakes, especially when venturing into unfamiliar territory.
Know what you don't know, right? So he contrasts the traditional keep the line moving no matter what mentality with W. Edwards Deming's philosophy of empowering every employee to stop the line if there's a problem.
Yeah, a radical idea at the time.
Yeah.
But Deming believed that everyone should be responsible for quality.
It's not just about stopping the line, it's about creating a culture of continuous improvement.
And, that approach was incredibly successful in Japan with companies like Sony and Toyota.
Okay, then we get to Steve Jobs. Catmull is very candid about his complex personality. Brilliant, but also, dismissive and often lacking empathy.
Working with him must have been a challenge, to say the least.
He tells this story about Steve stressing, listen and not talk, and then proceeding to dominate the meeting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Classic Steve.
How did they manage to work together with those strong personalities?
It must have taken a lot of resilience, but I think ultimately they both had that shared vision, that passion for creating something amazing.
Common ground can overcome a lot of friction.
Yeah, I think so.
During Toy Story, Catmull realizes he'd missed a crucial internal problem.
Despite thinking he was paying attention.
And it's a good reminder, right? As a leader, you don't always see everything.
It's a humbling realization.
It is. You need to actively seek out different perspectives, create space for people to speak up.
Absolutely. Okay, so in the Protecting the News section, there's a major problem during Toy Story 2's production.
The directors are constantly seeking John time.
Meaning Lasseter.
Right. And the story reels just aren't improving. What do you think was going on there?
I think it was a lack of confidence within the directing team itself. They were so reliant on Lasseter, they weren't owning the project.
And that's a recipe for, creative stagnation.
Exactly. Distributed leadership is crucial. Everyone needs to feel empowered to contribute.
So they decide to essentially overhaul Toy Story 2. Andrew Stanton stands up to Disney, and Lasseter ends up taking over as director.
It was a huge gamble, but it paid off. Toy Story 2 is considered one of the best sequels ever made.
And he talks about that key story element they added, Woody's internal conflict, framed with this incredibly powerful question. Would you choose to live forever without love?
Oh man, that gets me every time. It adds so much depth and meaning.
It's a reminder that a strong story, a story that resonates emotionally, can really elevate a project.
100%.
He then has this killer line, getting the team right is the necessary precursor to getting the ideas right.
Yeah, I love that. He's saying the people are more important than the ideas.
And that's a big shift in thinking, right? We tend to put so much emphasis on that initial idea, that spark.
But the truth is, a great team can elevate a mediocre idea, while a bad team can sink even the best one.
He also pushes back against this myth of the lone genius, saying ideas come from people, so people are more important.
It's demystifying the creative process. Most successful projects are collaborations, a blend of so many different contributions.
He then talks about the fine line between, having those really driven managers and then tipping over into this unhealthy crunch culture.
Yeah, that's a constant tension in creative fields, right?
You want people to be passionate and dedicated, but not at the expense of their well-being.
And leaders need to be really mindful of that, create a sustainable work environment.
And he emphasizes how Pixar really tries to support healthy habits. Things like valuing parental leave.
They take a long-term view on talent. Happy, healthy employees are more productive in the long run.
It's a smart approach. Then Catmull critiques the early reliance on mantras like story is king and trust the process.
Oh yeah, he says just repeating those phrases can provide a false sense of security if you don't actually understand what they mean.
He uses this analogy of a suitcase and a handle.
Right. The handle's there, but is it attached to anything?
Is there even anything in the suitcase?
You got to have substance behind those catchy phrases.
Action, not just words.
Exactly.
He talks about how trust the process could be interpreted in a couple of ways. It could be encouragement to persevere, to keep experimenting, but it could also be a way to avoid taking responsibility.
It's about trusting the process, yes, but also maintaining accountability, striving to learn and grow.
Okay, then we get to this essential concept, candor.
And that's so central to Pixar's culture.
Catmull says point blank, early on, all our movies suck.
It's about acknowledging that initial ideas are almost always flawed, that the creative process is messy.
The journey is from suck to not suck.
Yeah. And that mentality really creates a space for experimentation, for honest feedback.
They use these reels, early storyboards, with temp audio and the brain trust.
Which is this group of experienced filmmakers who offer really direct feedback.
But they diagnose problems, they don't prescribe solutions. Why is that distinction so important?
I think it's about empowering the filmmakers, giving them ownership of the project. The brain trust helps them see the problems, but they're the ones who ultimately figure out how to fix them.
So it's guidance, not control.
Precisely.
It's all about trusting those directors to bring their vision to life.
And that's a key part of Pixar's philosophy, filmmaker-led storytelling.
Jonas Rivera describes those brain trust meetings as where the movie is born.
With the films being in utero. during those early evaluations. It's such a great image.
Catmull even takes us inside a brain trust meeting for an early screening of Pete Docter's film, which we later know as Inside Out.
So many people are there, offering their perspectives.
And Brad Bird voices this concern, saying the story feels a bit slight, pushing for something the audience could invest more in.
It really highlights that level of critical thinking, the focus on engaging the audience on an emotional level.
So then Catmull breaks down the idea of giving good notes. What does that mean?
It means being specific, pointing out what's not working, what's missing. It's not just saying, I'm bored.
It's about providing constructive feedback that's actually helpful.
And as he points out, telling the truth can be hard. So a manager's role is to create a safe space for that kind of candor.
He even mentions these mini brain trusts for more focused feedback.
It's all about fostering a culture of open and honest communication.
Now, in the fear and failure section, Catmull draws a distinction between creative fields and those areas where, well, failure is not an option.
Like aviation or surgery.
Exactly. Where mistakes can have life or death consequences.
In those fields, the focus is on eliminating errors. But in creative fields, you have to embrace the possibility of failure.
It's part of the learning process.
Right. You can't innovate without taking risks.
He talks about big catastrophic failure, using the example of their scrapped blue-footed newt movie.
Even Pixar isn't immune to those big setbacks.
And they actually did this post-mortem on the project.
To figure out what went wrong.
Yeah, and they discovered they hadn't provided enough support for their newer directors.
You can't just assume that past success will automatically translate to future success. You have to have systems in place to support growth, to nurture talent.
He stresses how leaders need to be teachers, building a culture of continuous learning.
Leadership isn't just about directing. It's about empowering people, helping them develop their skills.
He also mentions how middle managers play a crucial role.
And how their fear of failure can really stifle innovation.
Because if they're afraid to surface problems, those problems just fester.
Leaders need to create a safe space for people to speak up, to admit when things aren't working.
It's about building trust.
That's the key. Trust is the foundation of a healthy creative environment.
Andrew Stanton has this great perspective. He says he actually gets worried if a film isn't a problem child right away.
Because that might mean they're not pushing boundaries.
Exactly. The struggles can be a sign that you're trying something truly new, something original.
Challenges are part of the creative process.
So Catmull advocates for this really empowering approach. Assume good intentions, give people responsibility, allow for mistakes, and enable them to fix those mistakes.
It's about fostering resilience, not trying to eliminate all risks.
Okay, now in The Hungry Beast and the Ugly Baby, he introduces this fantastic metaphor.
The beast.
That's it. A large organization constantly needing to be fed new material, new resources.
That pressure to keep the pipeline full can be overwhelming.
You can overshadow those early fragile ideas.
The ugly babies.
He talks about the Finding Nemo pitch. You had me at the word fish.
It's funny because it shows how undeveloped those early ideas can be.
They often don't look like much at first, but they have the potential to grow into something truly remarkable.
He talks about the intense production schedule of Toy Story 2 and then how they deliberately slowed down for Monsters, Inc.
To avoid burnout.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between efficiency and the well-being of the team.
Sometimes slowing down can actually lead to better results in the long run.
He also mentions their goal of finalizing scripts earlier. Do you think that's always realistic?
Well, in a perfect world, sure. But stories often evolve. It's finding that balance between having a solid foundation and being open to changes as needed.
He then talks about the dangers of inefficiencies in large organizations.
People waiting on each other, pressure to just keep feeding the beast, even if it means sacrificing those really promising but maybe unformed ideas. It's a systemic challenge.
Yeah, as he points out, it's not about blaming the individuals. It's about recognizing the pressures of the system itself.
He extends the beast metaphor to other creative industries, too.
And he says often the people in charge of feeding the beast, they're super organized, but they can stifle new ideas without meaning to.
It's about having those checks and balances, making sure the drive for efficiency doesn't kill creativity.
I like how he uses Pixar's intern program as an example.
Funding it centrally so individual departments wouldn't feel the budget pinch.
Yeah, that's smart.
He then brings in that great quote from Ratatouille.
Don Otago.
Yeah, about how the new needs friends.
It's a reminder to be a champion for those fragile, unconventional ideas, to nurture them.
We then get to the human tendency to resist change, even when we know it might be good for us.
It's the comfort of the familiar.
He uses that musical chairs analogy.
It's hard to let go of our routines, even if they're not working.
He then uses the evolution of up to show how messy the creative process can be. All those early versions, then finally, Carl and Russell.
It shows how important it is to be open to discarding ideas, to be willing to iterate.
Don't be afraid to kill your darlings, right?
Right.
But he also cautions against change just for the sake of change. It's about finding that sweet spot.
Structure, but with enough flexibility to allow for new ideas to emerge.
Okay, now we get to change and randomness. He acknowledges this pervasive randomness in everything.
It's something we often struggle to grasp because our brains are wired to look for patterns.
We want explanations, we want to make sense of things.
But randomness is, well, by definition, random.
He talks about how we often misinterpret chance events.
Taking credit for successes that might have been due to luck and blaming ourselves for failures that were, outside of our control.
He tells that crazy story about Toy Story 2 almost being deleted.
Oh, wow, I remember that. A series of completely random events, both the near loss and the incredible recovery.
And the key takeaway is that they didn't focus on assigning blame. They focused on fixing the system, making sure it wouldn't happen again.
It's a great example of how to turn a crisis into a learning opportunity.
He also talks about how, it's really hard to turn a consistently difficult person into a success story.
Because there are so many factors at play. You can nurture talent, but you can't control everything.
In The Hidden, he introduces this idea of, the hidden, the limitations of our perception.
Even when things seem to be going well, there are always things we're not seeing.
He uses the Cassandra analogy, someone who can see the truth, but no one believes them.
Oh, that's a good one.
He emphasizes that we have to accept that we just can't understand everything.
That we need to rely on different viewpoints to combine different perspectives to get a clearer picture.
He uses the example of Denise Ream on Up, whose experience at ILM gave her a fresh perspective on their production process.
And that fresh perspective led to real improvements.
He then talks about those unexpected 2-inch events that can have a huge impact.
Seemingly small things, those little interactions, those personal moments that can shift the course of events in a big way.
He tells that funny story about Dick and Anne arguing about the flat tire on their camper.
It's a great example of how our own mental models, our assumptions, can blind us to really obvious things.
He also talks about the dailies at Pixar, those daily review sessions where every single frame is analyzed.
It's a testament to their dedication to quality, that commitment to constant improvement.
And John Lasseter's insistence on thorough research.
Giving examples from Ratatouille up Finding Nemo.
It's about that authenticity, that depth of detail, even if the audience doesn't consciously notice it.
But they feel it.
He then talks about deadlines.
Not just as a way to keep things on track, but as a way to force prioritization.
To make those tough decisions about what's truly essential.
Limitations can actually spark creativity.
He also talks about the oversight group at Disney, which, despite good intentions, ended up hindering progress and morale.
Sometimes those structures we create to control things, they can actually do more harm than good.
You have to be willing to question those structures, to dismantle them if necessary.
The key is flexibility and adaptability.
He highlights the importance of integrating art and technology.
Using examples like the review sketch tool and digital storyboards, technology can be a powerful tool when it's used to enhance the creative process, not hinder it.
He also talks about Pixar's short films.
A great way to experiment and give new filmmakers a chance to shine.
And those drawing classes inspired by drawing on the right side of the brain.
It's all about learning to see differently, to set aside your assumptions and really observe.
Now, in Building and Sustaining, he talks about the value of postmortems.
Those after-action reviews to learn from both successes and failures.
He also emphasizes the importance of varying the format, keeping things fresh.
And then there's Pixar University, with its free classes for all employees.
Really fostering a culture of continuous learning.
It's investing in their people.
He then reflects on how we, as we grow older, tend to lose that childlike openness, that fearlessness. He tells that story about the elementary school art exhibit.
How the older kids become more self-conscious, more afraid to experiment.
He introduces these Zen concepts, not no mind and beginner's mind.
It's about being open to the new, not letting what you already know limit your thinking.
He acknowledges the discomfort that often comes with the creative process, stepping into the unknown.
And he talks about the mental models that can sustain you through those tough times.
Bob Peterson's analogy of filmmaking as an archaeological dig versus Catmull's belief in actively creating something new.
Two different approaches, but both valid.
He even compares screenwriting to climbing a mountain blindfolded versus building your own mountain from scratch.
I love that.
Producers, he says, often develop mental models focused on balance, on managing competing demands.
It's a different kind of leadership, but equally important.
Then there's mindfulness, this idea of focusing on the present moment.
Accepting your thoughts without judgment.
He shared some really interesting studies on Zen meditators.
Demonstrating a higher pain tolerance.
Yeah. And he compares managing by suppressing problems versus facing them mindfully.
Acknowledge the problem, don't just try to push it away.
In Testing What We Know, we get to the Disney acquisition.
A big moment for both companies.
Bob Iger's agenda, those concerns about maintaining Pixar's culture.
It must have been a delicate dance.
Catmull talks about his first meeting with the Disney animation team, encouraging them to speak their minds.
Creating a space for open communication.
And they got rid of that oversight group at Disney.
To remove those hierarchical barriers.
He describes the quick audit they did to assess Disney animation.
Identifying areas for improvement.
And that resistance they encountered from one executive who thought they were already on the 1-yard line.
Sometimes it's hard to see the need for change when you think you're almost there.
He uses the pyramid analogy to explain his approach to long-term planning.
Think broadly. Consider multiple possibilities.
They overhauled the note-giving process at Disney.
Streamlining feedback. Focusing on input from the filmmakers themselves.
And he uses the example of Bolt, which went from being a troubled project to an Oscar nominee.
A real success story.
He reflects on how there are no easy formulas for creativity.
It's a complex process.
And he talks about the challenges of growth at Pixar, bringing in new people with different perspectives.
Maintaining a shared culture becomes even more important as you scale.
But what he says he's most proud of is how the people at Pixar respond to a crisis.
With a sense of shared ownership and a collaborative spirit.
Exactly. And that leads us to Notes Day.
A day dedicated to company-wide problem solving.
He explains the thinking behind it. To recapture that early excitement, to bring in some of Disney's lightness and speed.
Fresh energy, new ideas.
He shares the anecdote about Guido Caroni and his suggestion to ask everyone for ideas on how to cut costs.
That was the spark for Notes Day.
They shut down Pixar for a whole day, asking everyone, how can we make Pixar better?
It was a radical move, but it showed immense trust in their employees.
Over 1,000 people participated.
Wow.
They planned meticulously, ensuring everyone felt heard.
And did it lead to actual changes?
Yeah. He talks about how even John Lasseter received pages of really direct feedback.
And how he took it to heart.
He did. No one was exempt from this process of self-assessment and improvement.
That's impressive.
He then explains why they decided to separate the executives, directors, and producers for some of the Notes Day sessions.
To allow for more open communication within each group.
Exactly. And in